That'll be easier. I prefer to walk around, in the sense it's difficult for me to stand behind a podium. So if you're okay, I'll come down. Okay. And how many of you have attended the previous conference? Because I'll decide my jokes accordingly. Okay? Okay, fantastic. So few of them, so a lot of them have not yet seen some of these. So my typical question, and the area that I've been working on for the last 9 years, is on building competencies for testers. That's been my interest, that's been my area of focus, and I've been working with a number of clients in understanding their real issues. And whenever I talk to them, every company tells me that their problem is in building competency. Do you agree? It's not the tool, it's not the methodology, but it's actually about identifying the right person, creating a right mindset, and ensuring he has the right abilities so that he can perform testing and move forward. Do you agree? And how many of you are engineers? Because it's a pre-qualification to join an IT industry. Okay, but you still raise the hands, which is good. You're very competent people. You understand questions. Okay. Number two, how many of you really went to a college to do engineering? All of you? Very good. That's fantastic. And how many of you actually completed a 4-year engineering program, to do engineering and get a job? 4 years? No one short-circuited? None of you in the room who is a Steve Jobs or a Bill Gates dropped out of school? No? Okay, nothing wrong with them, nothing wrong with you either. So I'm not judging you, so don't get me wrong, okay? I'm just validating some fundamentals, okay? So you went to a college, 4 years of engineering, and I'm sure you had to score a certain percentage to get a job, correct? As in you had to be in a certain range of marks, for you to be considered by an employer. And the bar keeps raising every year, correct? So what was the minimum percentage? Let's say 60% and above. How many of you scored a 60% and above or a 6 on 10 GPA? All of you? Can I say all of you? Lovely, So you are intelligent, correct? Can I conclude that? As in you are the select few, because if I look at the demographic of any country, engineering is something that many of us do not get an option of, correct? You have to be in you have to do a mathematics, physics, and chemistry as your base subjects. You have to do for 12 years of education on that, then go through a grueling 4 years of engineering, and then you have to score a 60%, and the company has to select you and put you on a job, correct? And for how many of you was testing the first choice of a job? Okay, few hands, so I can see intelligent people don't normally make a choice of testing as a career. That's also a conclusion we can draw, right? Is that right? Only 5 hands raised up where they said yes, Oh, okay. Yeah, there is an old story for that in India, right? There's this one Sardarji or the Sardar, anyone in the room who's a Sardarji here? No offense to you guys, please, okay? It's anyone. You can name it on anyone. You can name it as a Polish guy or an English guy, whichever race you want to claim that they were like brave. So he was pushed into the water, and he swam across, and when he came back and said, "You were very brave," his answer was, "Look, I didn't choose it, someone pushed me inside. That's how I had to survive, and hence I got into this winning of an award," correct? So many of us have that feeling, don't we? Yes? At that time, there were less jobs. We have enough excuses in life to live with, right? So in the same way, the trigger for this whole conversation, which I'm trying to present here, was one of the clients. I was talking to them and said, so yes, you have intelligent people, scored very well in their subjects, good engineering graduates. Let's not judge the institutions here, but they are good individuals who put in hard work. And after so many years of work, when they've come to you, how come you believe they're not competent? Right? The HR person says, no, we need to build competencies. We don't believe they're incompetent. We need to build the next level of competency. Fantastic. So I asked them a simple question saying, so what level of competency are they currently in? And they say, we don't know. And I say, how many years of experience? Normally in the first year of your working, how many of you have actually been evaluated in a scientific way? In the sense someone actually sat across your table, took a sample of 20 test cases, actually looked through the quality of what you have done, and a varied response there. Like that means they've taken a bad test cases, they've taken good test cases, and they've shown you the difference and said, hey, you know what? Your ability to really understand requirements is the real issue. I think you're writing it very well. Hence, you should be focusing on understanding requirements as a skill development activity. Anytime happened like that? No? Most of the performance appraisals are now automated. In some companies, they've even eliminated them. Yes or no? Right? So how does a performance appraisal typically happen? Anyone can help me here? I can tell you a scenario. You can tell me whether it's similar to your organization. The manager calls you. He'll say, so why are we meeting? Performance appraisal. We normally have a learning goals agreed in the beginning of the year, a set of tasks that you need to perform, a set of SLAs that you have been put against each one of them, and he typically grades you. And then you have a chance to contest the grading, correct? There will be a discussion around the SLA, meeting the SLA, instances to an extent, but never on the skills that you have demonstrated. Am I right? It's always on the results. So who gives the input about your skill development in your organization? You, your manager, or the learning team? Who gives the input? Which course you need to attend next? Which skill you need to develop next? Your manager? You? You self-nominate? Okay. So you know where you are? Very good. And you reach, just like, let me take an example, because we have been trained for 21 years on structured education with what we call a selective passing rate. We never knew the subject. How many of you studied engineering? You all said. So any one of you from here from mechanical engineering? Solid state thermodynamics, good topic. Studied it. You read it book to book, cover to cover. You knew the concepts. You could apply them even today. Yes? And you're telling me 40 hours of learning, 1 hour in a week, typically is the duration in any university. Am I right? In 40 hours, someone becomes qualified to really understand solid state thermodynamics, go out and apply that particular topic. How is the probability? In 100 people, how many do you think are qualified to really apply those concepts? Good question to ask, yes or no? Practical way of life, of course, we have to employ them. We will employ them. We will retrain them. We will, of course, do a lot of activities there. The point I'm making here is that even in the client situation, the fundamental issue was they did not have a very structured way of knowing where their team members were at. And because they did not know that, they could not really identify the learning opportunities in a structured way. They were spending a lot of money on the training and competency building, but it was not leading them anywhere in terms of creating a strong workforce. So they went around, so they said, can you help us? We said, okay, we'll look at the problem. We went in. Initial way of assessment. What is a common way of assessment? Any ideas? A quiz, yes or no? Because if you have to do something in a large scale and you have to find their abilities, you typically kind of create a simple quiz, yes or no? You write a 20-question paper. Most of the certification exams also are objective questions, yes or no? Multiple choice objective questions. The more rigorous question paper is decided by the number of questions that it has, and sometimes by the complexity of the question they put in, yes or no? Does it look designed anytime? How many of you have taken certification exams? How many of you felt after the certification exam, you really felt confident and said, you know what, I learned something, I know something, now I can do this better? Confidently. Or was it like, I have to have this certification since I need to secure a job or to maintain a job, hence I will complete it. So I will look for the easiest exam to pass, the less preparation time, and quicker to demonstrate. Which option would you choose? Tough, rigorous evaluation by 4 or 5 people, and then deciding what your career path is, versus taking an exam online, preferably at home, preferably open book, preferably with lesser questions as possible, and preferably should complete in 25 minutes, and should call me a manager, because I'm a manager now, you know. Which one would you choose? And it should cost low also, by the way, you know, that I'm not even adding. It should be probably free, but not as free as a brain bench exam, right? Brain bench is not really valued so much, though it's an exam, right? So the second option you have is, you have to have a case study or a scenario-based evaluation, yes or no? You take 5 or 6 case studies, you try to solve them, but then no one is there to evaluate them, yes or no? Someone has to be knowledgeable also to evaluate and grade you. Do you think your professor were intelligent when they graded you? There are a lot of horror stories I've seen because I served in BITS Pilani as a professor at one point of time, and I have known my colleagues who are professors who used to actually weigh the paper. In fact, I know friends of mine who passed an examination because they repeated the same question 5 times. And the instructor would look at it and say, yeah, there was supposed to be 10 lines as an answer. Oh, there were 10 lines, 2 marks. What he wrote, not relevant. The instructor was unfortunately, he had a lot of volume. He had 250 papers to correct in 10 days to declare results. The quality check is a big issue, yes or no? And I'm sure if I start asking some more technical questions, a lot of you would start questioning your own engineering intelligence, yes or no? Right? If I start asking her, for example, on solid-state thermodynamics and say, okay, let's talk about Hyperloop system now that's coming up in Bangalore, which is a magnetic levitation, which principle of thermodynamics would really apply? And what would be the kind of an inertial strength that I need to produce so that this one moves? Basic question for a first-year engineering graduate, yes or no, who is mechanical engineer. Agree or disagree? But anyway, we're not going into that. So what we did was we created for this organization a method where we experimented. So we tried different methods. And what came out was a very interesting way of evaluating the skill. So first level was, we had to prepare people to understand what this assessment is all about. Because there's a fear of assessment in an organization, especially after you're employed. And sometimes compounded by the environmental factors, yes or no? Right? Mr. Trump came into power, and unfortunately there is no more outsourcing. That's what is the generalized view without detail again. And thereby, there is a risk of jobs. And suddenly your HR has its own parallel initiative where they're trying to build competencies. And they say, we are going to evaluate every one of you so that we can prepare training budgets better. How many of you sincerely believe you're HR? As in, they're 2 parallel things. Believe me, this is just a point of coincidence. It just so happened that the 2 happen to be at a coincidental point. But you won't believe your HR, yes or no? So there's a fear of evaluating ourselves. Do you face that? Yes, no? How many of you were scared of exams in the university? How many of you studied only one night before the exams? How many of you didn't even understand what you wrote in the examination paper, but that one night you somehow crammed with your friends and finished that exam? Right? And how many of you thought your instructor was really knowledgeable and thereby you got 60%? A lot of probabilities here, okay? In the sense, if you start adding up, the probability of people who are coming into the industry is a questionable number, yes or no? Okay, but anyways. So the point I'm making is, so we first had to remove what we call as the fear of assessment from the individuals. We had to actually explain to them that our intent was not to really take someone away from the job. And we also had to tell at the same time a contradictory statement saying, hey, you know what? We are not going to remove you from your job, but we are going to really critically evaluate you, what you know and what you don't know. Good statement, bad statement. How do you go about doing that? Because if you don't do a critical evaluation, you're going nowhere. It can't be peripheral because then the whole integrity of the assessment procedure would go down, yes or no? If you feel that it's an easy one, it's a notional one, it's a face wash, again, the whole purpose is lost, yes or no? So you have to go very deep, but at the same time, the individual has to participate. So we did what we call as an orientation sessions. So we actually called people and we put them into rooms, we started explaining to them about this whole assessment, we took ideas from the team. Because a very interesting concept we learned in the whole journey with QAI was we had to show what we call as empathy. That means I have to really understand and put myself in the shoes of a guy taking an assessment as to how he feels about it and whether it was easy to use, simple to use. He's sincerely answering the questions and he's really participating in the whole process. That's the first key. Otherwise, every evaluation is just a hogwash. The second step, what we had to do was we had to find evaluators who were credible, yes or no? Right? And you had to have scenarios which were very reflective of what they do in their organization, rather than coming up with a generic templatized version of a case study. Right? Have you ever heard of Harvard Business School case studies? As in every management school that you go to, they think of it as an important exercise and a journey that you need to go through. So we actually went and talked to a few people in Harvard who are in instruction design, understood what this case methodology was all about. And then we figured out that in testing world also we can create scenarios. For example, if you take a HP ALM and you look at how people automate that and how they use it, we created different scenarios depending on the role that you play. So if I'm a test engineer using ALM, your scope is very clear. But then I have to define a scenario, I have to test you on that scenario, and then I have to get it evaluated by a set of experts to conclude what your skill level is. And I also have to give you feedback. Right? So we devised around, we took a sample of around 3 areas, and in those 3 areas, we actually started to develop case studies. Then we created, then every evaluator is different, correct? Each evaluator has his own subjective way of grading things. Someone will say, this is well done, but another one can say, no, it's not well done. So we had to normalize the way evaluators grade people. So we had to create certain criteria. We had to create some guidelines of how they interpret these criteria. And we had to train these evaluators to make sure that they will follow a certain dictum. Okay, so when the results come out, they can be easily comparable. Because if I want to tomorrow see which of the individuals are in the top 10 percentile of the organization, I will know. And I will know with credible information and credible data. And then once we have done the assessment of the individual, then we had to actually go back and talk to these individuals one-on-one. And then devise a learning plan. Do you think it's possible? Or does it now sound very academic exercise? Looks very ideal, yes or no? Right? As in, who has the time to sit down and participate in a case study kind of a scenario and then finish the entire activity? So anyway, the summary of the entire exercise in a very simple nutshell is we have completed totally around 28,000 people in 2 different organizations which we have done assessments on 3 different areas. And the interesting thing is the clock turns a different way. Now, once we have done this assessment, okay, what do you expect? Good participation, bad participation, people going back and self-learning, or do you expect people expecting something more from the organization? That's a bigger question, yes or no? Because everyone who was participating in the assessment wanted to know what happens next. So interestingly, what happened in this organization is it created a kind of a self-learning mechanism. In the sense, people started to become curious. They started to see scenarios which were not seen by them in a normal way. Someone started to say, can I go to the next level in terms of evaluating myself, someone who are in the top of the heap. So in the process, it also became a self-selection mechanism for us, which means the team started accepting, like in your college also, I'm sure you know, who were your best top guys, who were intelligent guys in campus. Would you know that? Who were sharp, patent type of guys, research type of guys. Would you identify them? And there were those fun type of guys, and they were like, people who would just waste time, right? In the same way, in the organization also, we started seeing the individuals, becoming more selective and accepting the person who is actually moving to the next level. And that created a different dynamic altogether. In the sense, the individuals started to, co-create, along the whole teams, and they started to create their own centers of competence in small units, in different geographies, in different teams, which started to share practices among each one of them. So that's the story I wanted to share with you. So now, in the presentation, I have a few slides, which I will just focus on for a minute. So as I said, knowledge evaluation is an easy task. Many organizations do it, but the current methods of evaluating always with me, yes, every presentation. So most of the time, the knowledge evaluation is very generic. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you a specific indication of where to improve and where not to improve. Even from a design perspective, there's a lot of improvement in the objective question design, but this process is not as scientific in many of the cases in testing. The more important evaluation everyone is looking for today is a skill evaluation, not just a knowledge evaluation. Knowing what to do is important, but knowing how to do is more critical. If you're going to see automation, if you're going to see more of work in all the technical areas that you talk about, you'll need to have a scenario-based orientation. That's the lesson we learned from our customer journeys. Again, what happens when you do an assessment? Many a times organizations shy away from this idea, but what we have seen from our experience with the clients is, from an unconscious incompetence that many people have, like most of us are unconsciously incompetent, yes or no? As in, we believe we are intelligent, but that's always questionable. Any doubts? No? Okay. I believe that we are unconsciously incompetent. Once you're told, any smart individual in the world would build his competence, but to go to a stage of being consciously competent, that means constantly looking for what needs to change, is most of the time a challenge in organization. That's what we are talking about, assessment as one of the key elements to that. To going to a mindful competence state, right? So assessment is a vehicle that really helps in. That's what we have seen from, we used to do trainings, we used to do consulting assignments, we used to do transformation engagements, but every time it was the same client who would call us again 3 years later, right? And most often they would have the same problem. And when we say, why are you having the same problem? The answer is, this is a new crowd, In 3 years, a lot of changes have happened in the organization. We are still in the same boat. So the idea is to move to a mindful state of competence, not only at the individual level, but also to an organizational level, which is where Peter Senge describes it as a learning organization. That means the organization is constantly moving forward. So this is just a small case study that we have seen. In this client's situation, we had around 15,000 odd testers. They have all gone through a sequence of evaluations, observations, and also feedback, and then learning plan design. And again, as I said, the question many people ask is it scalable? Can you do it in large scale? What you're talking makes sense in a small team of 10 members, and it looks nice and idyllic, but can you really do it in a large scale? That's exactly why I'm trying to tell you that, yes, we have done this at 15,000 members, and clients of the same size are doing it. So that's a design. If you see it, what we have done here is this is something like a schema. So when you go back and look at it, you'll be able to understand. This is something like a small secret sauce that worked for us in some of the client scenarios. That's what I'm putting up here. So when you look at a workforce, what we say is that every workforce is constituted by a set of roles, which are played by people, of course. And each role is broken up into 2 parts. One is the job that you do, which means the activities that you perform as part of your day. And there is a different position at which you perform. For example, you could be an engineer, manager, analyst, architect. These are your positions within that particular project. The autonomy that you demonstrate for those jobs varies in these positions, correct? So we need to design a framework which helps you. So if I'm a guy designing a test case, then a manager should be reviewing the test case, yes or no? Right? So the autonomy and the way in which you perform the job changes, the time that you spend changes, and evaluation has to align with that amount of time that you spend and the autonomy and the task that you do. Otherwise, it's a waste of an assessment, right? Asking, like for example, everyone takes, like we do CST certifications. So the range, when I talk to my certification head in the US, he says, anyone between 3 years to 8 years can take this certification. Now that's a broad range, yes or no? As in considering that in every 2 years our role changes. Sometimes you start as a test engineer, you'll become a senior test engineer. Does it mean that the job changed? Yes, it does. A little bit of change is there, a little bit of more activities are added on. Otherwise you can't be called a senior test engineer, correct? Or some amount of an autonomy on certain task changes. So when you say a range of 3 to 8 years, or for example, even, I should not be naming them, but again, ISTQB as an organization, they say anyone can be applying for a foundation. Lovely. My question is, so anyone between 0 to 15 years is on the same scale. A little odd, in the sense it's a good qualification. It's a minimum or the least common denominator, as they call it in mathematics, right? If you have a certification, you have the least common denominator. You understand the basics. That doesn't mean you know all. That's the basis, and then you're eligible to come in. Now you move forward. So what it does is, from that combination of these 2 elements, we move into defining what we call as skill sets, and we also move into explaining them as competencies, listing the competencies, the individual knowledge criteria, and the performance criteria for that particular job. Okay? So it's a very detailed, I can share the slide with you, you can have a look at it in greater detail, but in clear detail, we narrow it down to specify how this role plays out and how exactly the performance should be measured for the job that he's doing. And for the position, we are looking at level of involvement as the important criteria. And based on the level of involvement, we decide what level of assessment that needs to be provided to the individual. And it, of course, drops off into the designing of a career path and making the entire information done. So anyways, so that's the process as I mentioned. We prepare a role skill map, specify the case studies and instructions to them. The candidate goes through a selection procedure, a change management procedure, takes up the solution, presents the solution back to us. We have a group of evaluators who go through the evaluation, grade the individuals, and then provide him a feedback and say where he needs to improve. Simple solution. And we have done this in these areas just for your information. So in all these areas we can possibly apply this concept in your organizations when you go back. And that's the flow. So as I mentioned, this is just an example of some of the criteria that we have done for a functional testing activity, just for your information there. So all of these ones in the blues that you see are all the artifacts. So these were all designed specifically for that particular client, so that they can actually go through this sequence of the steps, very well thought through and a documented one. Anyway, so I'll summarize, my time is up, but I'll just summarize in a simple way. So what's the lesson learned after doing so many structured assessment and so many individuals going through so much of a detailing? And why is it that only a few organizations which are doing it in a large scale amongst the whole entire world, and why not everyone? Why is it not a common way of doing things? Interestingly, the practicality of business takes over the purpose of actually building talent, yes or no? Run the business, grow the business seem to be two different initiatives in many of my clients. And the person who is running the business is not really interested in growing the business. And the person who is interested in growing the business is actually not interested in running the business. Okay? So at one level there is an idealism and there is a futuristic view. At another level there is a very practical and a pragmatic view. Now let me ask you this question lastly. Who takes a decision on training? Running the business, growing the business. 37 client meetings, and I've got only 2 who answered it. 35 didn't answer it yet. They say, we'll come back to you. We'll have to figure it out internally. I'm just giving an instance to you to understand, that learning is not necessarily a priority for organizations which are, in the space of testing, right? Because it's already seen at one level as a cost, and an investment onto an existing cost is seen as a double the cost. So finally it ends up on you, yes or no? Right? That's why you said, I nominate myself for the trainings that I need. True? Is that a good way? It's a thing to think about. But what I've learned, and again, I'll just tell you in a simple way. I smoke, and this is a lesson I'll always tell to everyone. How many of you smoke? Very few hands, good to see. Like whole world is getting healthier, and obese, fantastic, So anyways, now, I'm sure there are enough research around the world which tells you not to smoke. Am I right? Like my wife is a statistician at one level, so she develops all this research, comes up with all this data, puts it in front of me and says, look, please do not smoke because look at this data. Even now recently on Facebook there was some post about how after smoking 600 cigarettes, your lungs become, there was a video of someone who did an experiment. So even that I keep getting it as my WhatsApp feed is that mostly, from my wife. It's never that I love you, so I'm okay with that. So in the whole story, now knowing that research, why do you think I smoke? Do you think I'm an unintelligent guy? Maybe, on that particular aspect, I may be unintelligent. So anyway, my reasoning is a little different, because the ego kicks in, right? So you start to say, look, I understand the research. Like, I'm sure you must have seen a smoking packet, right? Have anyone of you seen a cigarette packet? Yes? What's written on the packet? In India, there are a lot of pictures as well. As in, I don't read much, but there are a lot of pictures, right? So I normally take out a single cigarette and I tell her saying, what's written on the cigarette? So she says, nothing. It just says classic mild. Sometimes it's Marlboro. So I say, what's the lesson, lady? You're intelligent. You've done so much research. On the packet, it says smoking kills. On the cigarette, it doesn't say anything. What do you conclude? So I said 20 at a time kills a person. I smoke 1 at a time. Right? And the point I'm making, the lesson I'm telling you is, yes, the point I'm making here is very simple. Most of us, think about competency development or developing the workforce or building competencies as that 1 cigarette at a time. We don't know the damage we are doing in terms of how the organization will shape up. Will it be ready for the future? Will it really be able to take up the challenges? Is always a question at hand. And 1 cigarette at a time, which means 1 day at a time you skip on this particular idea of knowing your workforce and their capabilities. 1 day you will have finished the 20 pack, yes or no? Right? The effect is the same. Your team is still not competent, not skillful. So my point to all of you as a takeaway is, think about skill assessment as an interesting area, at an individual level at least, to see where you stand. Don't go by just a simple certification that you hold. That's the minimum denominator, as I mentioned. It's the least common denominator you should have. But please think about how do we assess ourselves, how do we really build ourselves, and how do we grow ourselves. That's my only message for this conference. Thank you, Amber, and I hope I have not overshot.
You have, and that absolutely leaves us with no time for great presentation, Pradeep. Thank you. No time for question and answer, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know about what you guys take back home from this testing conference. I'm certainly going to take that smoking example back to my wife. And for the first time, I reached out into my pocket and I said, hey, let me relook at this. So I also need to do a lot of justification to my wife for this. And that's my takeaway for the conference. And that'll serve me a lifetime of purpose. Thank you. And since we cannot do from QAI honors to Pradeep, if I may ask Dr. Shankar, a good friend and sort of a extension of QAI, to kindly do the honors and present this e-memento. So we have named this e-memento. Dr. Shankar, here you are. Okay. Thank you, Pradeep. Again, 1 round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Backdrop, boss. Backdrop. Put the backdrop. Change the backdrop. Okay, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Pradeep. You can treat yourself to a smoke outside. Okay. Okay, with that, the final keynote for the day, but that doesn't mean that we end for the day. There's 2 great paper presenters after this, and some important announcements, some wonderful, exciting contests and other giveaways. Our sponsors are lining up as we come into the evening. But before I move on to the next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I'd request as a host for this conference and on behalf of all my colleagues at QAI that all of you turn up in full strength and show for the gala night evening dinner and entertainment. There'll be also quite a lot of raffle and give prizes and surprises announced by our sponsors. And there's a great rule, house rule. That is, who misses out on the raffle draw, the gift goes to me. Okay? So if you don't turn up, too bad. That's good luck for me, but just to lay it out up front. That's the rule of the house. Okay? The MC takes away the raffle draw if the participant or the delegate does not turn up. So all yours. Like you, all of you too, we've put up a great evening ahead, and we wish and hope that all of you turn up and spend your time with us. So with that, we move on to the last keynote of the day, DevOps Next, keeping it simple, the SoftGener way. And may I call on stage Abhishek Kumar Preetham, Manager Testing, SoftGener. Abhishek. Young gentleman with a career in software testing, and currently entrusted with ensuring, setting up, refining SoftGener test efficiency technique and end-to-end software test lifecycle with business-driven test management. An active Prince 2, Exin, and Agile Scrum Master. Also owning the DevOps Next, keeping it simple, the SoftGener way. proprietary tool project, which is intended to be the next trendsetter for the global software testing quality IT market. And I hand it over to Abhishek. Your timer is right up here, and we hope we'll make it in good time. Thank you, Abhishek, for being with us.